What if the warning signs you've been ignoring are the very signals meant to set you free? There comes a moment quiet, almost imperceptible, when something within you begins to shift. It doesn't arrive with noise or drama. In fact, it often feels like the absence of something rather than the presence of it. The chaos that once defined the relationship no longer stimulates you in the same way. The emotional highs and lows, which may have once felt like passion or intensity, start to feel exhausting, repetitive, hollow. And in their place, something unfamiliar begins to emerge: a desire for peace. This is not weakness. It is not boredom. It is the psyche recalibrating itself. You begin to notice that what once kept you engaged now drains you. Conversations feel circular, arguments feel scripted, and emotional reactions begin to lose their grip on you. You may even find yourself withdrawing slightly, not out of avoidance, but out of a growing awareness that your energy is being misused. This is the beginning of psychological separation, long before any physical distance occurs. What's important to understand here is that this shift does not come from external validation. No one needs to tell you something is wrong. You feel it deeply. It's a quiet recognition that your inner world is no longer in alignment with what you are experiencing externally. And when that misalignment persists, the mind seeks correction. So instead of chasing resolution, you begin craving stillness. Instead of trying to fix the connection, you start questioning why it feels so fractured in the first place. This is where many people become uncomfortable, because peace, in this context, requires you to confront truth, and truth disrupts illusion. And perhaps the most unsettling part is this: once you taste that internal peace, even briefly, you can no longer fully return to the chaos without feeling the cost of it. The contrast becomes undeniable. So if you find yourself longing for calm instead of conflict, for clarity instead of confusion, understand that this is not SLU che a ikratkoi nost yeriot, is awareness awakening. And once awareness awakens, the only real question left is this: will you honor what you now see, or will you choose to ignore it? Then, almost inevitably, you begin to witness something even more unsettling: the gradual collapse of the image you once believed in. What first appeared as consistency starts to reveal itself as performance. The warmth, the attentiveness, sense that you had encountered someone uniquely attuned to you, it begins to feel less authentic and more constructed. This is where the psyche encounters contradiction. You are faced with two realities that cannot coexist: the person you thought you knew, and the person you are now observing. And the tension between these two images creates cognitive dissonance. You try to reconcile it. You tell yourself they're just going through something, that stress or circumstance is to blame. But over time, these explanations become harder to sustain. You start noticing patterns. Words that promise connection are followed by actions that create distance. Moments of affection are strategically timed, often appearing when you begin to pull away or question the dynamic. What once felt spontaneous now feels calculated. And perhaps most importantly, you begin to sense that your emotional responses are being managed, subtly influenced, in a way that keeps you engaged, yet perpetually uncertain. From a psychological perspective, what you are witnessing is not simply inconsistency, it is fragmentation. A divided self cannot maintain coherence indefinitely. The mask, as Jung might describe it, serves a purpose: to present a version of the self that secures attachment, admiration, or control. But the mask requires energy to sustain, and over time, reality leaks through. And when it does, it doesn't announce itself loudly. It reveals itself in small ruptures, an unexplained coldness, a dismissive comment, a lack of empathy where there once seemed to be understanding. These moments accumulate. Individually, they may seem insignificant. Collectively, they form a pattern that can no longer be ignored. The danger here is not merely deception, it is self-deception. Because the longer you cling to the initial image, the more you distort your perception of what is actually happening. You begin to question your own judgment, your own intuition, even your own worth. But the emergence of truth, however uncomfortable, is a necessary disruption. It forces a confrontation between illusion and reality. And once you see the mask for what it is, you are left with a choice that defines everything moving forward. Will you continue relating to who they pretended to be, or will you respond to who they have revealed themselves to be? As this realization deepens, the impact is no longer just cognitive, it becomes physiological, emotional, almost existential. You begin to feel it in your body, in your energy, in the way you move through your day. What once felt engaging now feels depleting. And this is where a crucial distinction emerges. Healthy connection expands you, while unhealthy attachment contracts you. You may notice a subtle but persistent fatigue, one that rest doesn't seem to fix. It's not simply physical tiredness, it's the weight of constant emotional processing. You're analyzing conversations, replaying interactions, trying to make sense of inconsistencies that never quite resolve. Your mind is occupied, but not in a way that leads to clarity, rather, it leads to confusion. From a psychological standpoint, this is what happens when your internal system is placed under continuous strain. The human psyche seeks coherence, stability, and mutual exchange. But when you are in a dynamic where energy flows primarily in one direction, where you are giving, adapting, accommodating, and receiving very little in return, it creates imbalance. And imbalance, over time, manifests as depletion. What's particularly insidious is that this exhaustion often becomes normalized. You tell yourself that relationships require effort, that no connection is perfect. And while that is true to a degree, there is a fundamental difference between effort that builds and effort that erodes. One strengthens your sense of self, the other slowly diminishes it. You may also begin to notice a loss of inspiration. Things that once excited you, your goals, your interests, even your sense of identity, start to fade into the background. Your focus narrows, centering more and more around maintaining the relationship or managing its volatility. In this way, your world becomes smaller, not larger. And perhaps the most telling sign is this: you feel alone, even when you are not physically alone. There is a lack of genuine emotional reciprocity, a sense that you are not truly seen or understood. This kind of loneliness is not about absence, it is about disconnection. At this stage, the question is no longer whether something is wrong. The evidence is no longer subtle, it is embodied. Your system is signaling that what you are experiencing is unsustainable. And when your very energy begins to withdraw from a connection, you must ask yourself a difficult but necessary question. Is this relationship nourishing your life or quietly consuming it? As this dynamic continues, another pattern begins to take shape, one that is often overlooked because it unfolds gradually, almost invisibly. You find yourself becoming more distant from the very things that once grounded you. Relationships that used to feel natural, friends, family, even mentors, begin to fade into the background, not necessarily because of conflict, but because your attention, your time, and your emotional energy are being redirected elsewhere. At first, it may seem circumstantial. You tell yourself you've just been busy, preoccupied, or focused on making the relationship work. But over time, a deeper realization emerges. The more invested you become in this one connection, the less space remains for everything else that once sustained you. From a psychological perspective, this is not accidental. Isolation, in many cases, is not enforced directly, it is cultivated subtly. It can appear in the form of small criticisms about the people in your life, gentle suggestions that others don't understand you the same way, or moments that make you question the loyalty or intentions of those closest to you. None of it is overt enough to immediately alarm you, but collectively it begins to reshape your perception. You start to withdraw, sometimes unconsciously. Invitations are declined, conversations become shorter. The emotional bond you once shared with others weakens, not because it has lost value, but because it is no longer being nourished. And as those connections fade, something else intensifies your reliance on the very person who is at the center of this shift. This is where the structure becomes clear. When your external support system diminishes, your internal resilience is more easily influenced. Without alternative perspectives, without grounding voices, your reality becomes increasingly defined by a single narrative. And that is a vulnerable position to be in, whether you realize it or not. What makes this particularly complex is that it doesn't feel like control, it feels like attachment. It feels like closeness, like exclusivity, like being chosen. But true connection does not require the abandonment of everything else that gives your life meaning. It does not shrink your world, it expands it. And when you look around and realize that your world has quietly become smaller, more confined, more dependent on one person's presence or approval. That is not intimacy, it is limitation. So the question you must confront is simple, yet profound. Are you becoming more of yourself within this connection, or are you slowly losing access to the very life that once made you whole? At this stage, something within you becomes increasingly difficult to ignore. It is not loud, not dramatic, and not driven by emotion in the way earlier reactions may have been. It is quieter than that, steady, persistent, and remarkably clear. Your intuition begins to assert itself. What's important to understand is that intuition is not irrational. It is the mind's ability to recognize patterns beneath the surface of conscious thought. Long before you can articulate what is wrong, you feel it. A subtle tension in your body, a hesitation in your responses, a quiet sense that something is misaligned. These signals are not random, they are accumulated observations, distilled into a form that bypasses denial. Earlier, you may have dismissed this voice. You may have labeled it as overthinking, insecurity, or even fear of losing the relationship. And so you overrode it. You chose logic over instinct, explanation over perception. But as the patterns repeat, as the inconsistencies become undeniable, that internal voice grows stronger, not weaker. You begin to question things you once accepted without hesitation. You revisit moments that didn't quite make sense at the time, but now seem significant. Your awareness sharpens. And with that awareness comes a kind of discomfort, because intuition does not negotiate, it reveals. From a psychological standpoint, this is the integration of conscious and unconscious material. The parts of you that once remained in background, observing, recording, sensing, are now moving into the foreground. And when they do, they challenge the narrative you've been maintaining. This is why many people experience internal conflict at this stage. One part of you still wants to preserve the connection, to believe in its potential, to hold on to what it once seemed to be. But another part of you, deeper, more grounded, recognizes the reality of what it is. And the longer this conflict persists, the more energy it consumes. Because ignoring intuition requires effort. It requires you to suppress what you know in favor of what you hope. But here is the turning point. Intuition does not disappear when ignored, it intensifies. It repeats, it insists, it finds new ways to reach you until it is acknowledged. And when you finally allow yourself to listen not selectively, but honestly, you are faced with a truth that cannot be comfortably unlearned. So the question becomes unavoidable. If your inner voice has been consistently warning you, guiding you, attempting to protect you, how much longer will you choose to silence the one part of yourself that sees clearly? And eventually, you arrive at the point where the pattern is no longer deniable. What once appeared as isolated incidents now reveals itself as a cycle, predictable, structured, and deeply ingrained. There is a rhythm to it. Tension builds, conflict emerges, an apology or moment of emotional intensity follows, and for a brief time, things seem to improve. You begin to feel a sense of relief, even hope. Perhaps this time you think something has truly changed. But it doesn't last. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the same behaviors return. The same misunderstandings, the same emotional distance, the same sense of instability. And you find yourself back where you started, only now more invested, more attached, and often more confused. This repetition is not growth, it is reinforcement. Each cycle deepens the bond, not because it is healthy, but because it conditions you to associate temporary relief with genuine change. From a psychological perspective, this is how attachment becomes entangled with dysfunction. The mind begins to anticipate resolution, to cling to the moments of calm as evidence that the relationship can work. But in reality, those moments are part of the cycle itself. They are not exceptions, they are components. What makes this stage so critical is that awareness has now fully formed. You are no longer reacting blindly. You see the sequence. You recognize the predictability. And with that recognition comes a profound shift. The illusion of uncertainty is replaced by the clarity of pattern. Yet clarity alone is not enough. Because even when you understand the cycle, there is still a part of you that may want to believe it can be broken. That with enough effort, patience, or sacrifice, the outcome might change. But cycles of this nature persist precisely because they are not dependent on your effort, are sustained by a dynamic that operates beyond your control. This is where the real confrontation occurs, not with the other person, but within yourself. You are faced with the reality that continuing in the same pattern will only produce the same result. And at that moment, the question is no longer about them, it is about you. Will you remain in a cycle that has already shown you its outcome? Or will you step outside of it, despite the discomfort that comes with change? Because the truth is simple, even if it is difficult to accept. A pattern repeated enough times is no longer a mistake, it is a decision.